Hi, folks. Um, this is my friend Apache. We're rather attached to one another, and he's joining me here for our casual service, sort of a fireside chat, if you will. And I'd like to open with the lighting of our chalice. I open this week with the words of our 34th president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he said, "A people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both."
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh yes, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. If you get there before I do, oh yes, Lord, tell all my friends I'm coming too. Oh yes, Lord, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Glory,
This week's sermon is called "It Is Our Privilege." I came across this passage a couple of weeks ago on the occasion of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It said, "May the MLK quote you post today align with your words and actions you choose over the next 364 days." I thought a lot about that statement since then. We've observed Martin Luther King Day since the mid-1980s and made February Black History Month in 1976. March is Women's History Month. June is LGBT Pride Month. Some states, including New York, are changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. In doing so, we recognize not only the contributions of these minorities, but also the fact that their struggles for equality have not been fully realized. I think that it's fitting and proper that we do this. But the cynical side of me has to wonder if these are perhaps token efforts, a kind of consolation prize. The majority, and by majority I traditionally am speaking about white males, gives to these groups in some vague recognition that they are or were treated as second class or less than. Equality, or the lack of it, has been a theme in America going back to our founding. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Of course, in 1776 rather, he was really talking about white male property owners. Few, if any, people back then would have considered blacks or women to be equal to white males. We're still wrestling with the idea of equality today. There's been a lot of talk in at least the past 2 or 3 years about privilege and what that means. For our purposes today, I want to talk about privilege in the sense of benefits one receives that are not earned. So for example, I am a straight white male. I didn't earn those distinctions. I was born into them. There are certain benefits I receive because I am a straight white male. I'm far less likely to be discriminated against on almost every level. If I get pulled over for speeding or walking the streets late at night, I'm much less likely to be questioned or otherwise have action taken against me by law officers. I'm more likely to be paid a higher wage than a woman with the exact same job qualifications as I have. I'm not going to be labeled as a sinner or an abomination because I'm married to someone of the opposite sex. If I commit a crime, chances are that I'd receive a less severe penalty than a person of a different skin color. I'm more likely to be approved to buy a home in a nice neighborhood. The list could go on, but you get the idea. And keep in mind, I'm talking about unearned benefits. I didn't do anything to be white, straight, and male. It's just the way I am. When you have privilege, you may not even think about it. One of the privileges of having privilege is not really having to think about it. It just seems to you that that's the way things are. That's the way they've always been. And when people suggest that we have privilege, we might even feel offended. It implies that maybe we think we're better, or that we didn't work for what we have. I mean, try telling a white guy who works 2 jobs to make ends meet that he is privileged, and he may punch you in the face. And yet statistically, he would face less social and economic barriers than a woman or a black or Hispanic person in the same position. I think there's also this notion that extending privilege to others means that we have to give up some of ours. But privilege doesn't work like that. It's not like cake, where you having a piece means less for me. It would be more accurate to say that some of us were born next door to the bakery. Others being able to come to the bakery doesn't mean that we still don't get cake or can't have our cake. I'm going to show you a video now that really drives home one of the points I'm trying to make here. And I showed this once before when I talked about poverty, but it applies here as well, perhaps more so. And I'm apologizing ahead of time for the poor quality. I could only enlarge the video so much. So hear this, watch this, and I'll meet you on the other side.
Line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go!
We all have to run this race called life, but we don't all start at the same line. To be clear, there are benefits that we can and do earn through our efforts and choices. Things like a job promotion, or an education, or a home, or a cat, or a dog. There's nothing wrong with that. Having privilege is not something to feel guilty, not something to feel embarrassed about, but it is something to be aware of. I think back to the quote I used when I started this talk. May the MLK quote you post today align with your words and actions you choose over the next 364 days. And I also think of some of the words in our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. 3 principles in particular. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Those are good words. Those are lofty, well-intended words. But whether you're talking about the words in those principles, or of Martin Luther King Jr., or Susan B. Anthony, or in the Declaration of Independence, or in the preamble of our Constitution, words have power. But only if we give them meaning through our actions. Life isn't fair. We know this. It is sometimes a harsh reality that we all learn sooner or later. We can't make it so that everyone has equality or privilege. But to the extent that we can do that and choose not to, well, we're not really living up to the words then, are we? We're kind of living in the other 364 days of the year, as it were. The goal, or one of them anyway, is to get to a point where months set aside for Black history or women's history or LGBT pride or indigenous peoples won't be necessary. They won't be necessary because we'll have gotten to a point where peoples of all colors and ethnicities and creeds and orientations will simply be accepted as equals. I doubt that any of us will live to see that day, but at the same time, I take heart in the fact that so much progress has been made over the past 244 years. We've got a long way still to go, but we've come a long way as well. Something to think about. I close this service with the words of the author Bell Hooks. And she writes, "Privilege does not have to be negative, but we have to share our resources and take direction about how to use our privilege in ways that empower those who lack it."
In ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple walls fix, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love.
Privilege for others doesn't mean less privilege for us. It's not cake.